Hello guys, welcome back to my channel, Karibu Tena. If you're new here, hi, my name is Maddie. I am a registered nurse that works in the PACU and former ICU nurse. I love making content for nurses, nursing students, and other healthcare workers, and I'm so glad that you found me here. So obviously, if you're anything like me, perhaps you're struggling with test anxiety, and to this day, I still struggle with test anxiety, even if it's like a little quiz on like a work module that I can retake like 10 times over. I still get test anxiety. And if that's something that you struggle with, then I'm glad that you found me because we can support each other in that. Hopefully I can bring you some encouragement. And then I've got a few tips for you as well. So you don't have to struggle with it as hard. Now, before I get into the video, of course, I want to encourage you guys to like this video if you find it helpful. Subscribe to my channel. I have a lot of how-to for nursing students and nurses. And then I also like to just track my lifestyle and healthy habits and promote those as well. So if you like this content, be sure to subscribe to it because it supports me. And then I can also continue to put these helpful videos out there. All right, and with all that being said, let's actually get into the video. Okay, so first, let's talk about some of the reasons why you may be anxious about taking a test in the first place. And there's 4 kind of categories that I've broken this down into. So if you find yourself in one of them, we'll talk about it for just a moment and see what you can do to overcome it. And then I'll talk about a little bit more practical tips to do while you're in the seat taking the test. So the first one that I want to cover is one that's a little bit more of an easy one to remedy, and that is you're anxious because you procrastinated. So obviously, kind of the key to solving procrastination is doing it sooner and earlier and making sure that you're being more dedicated. And one of the best ways you can do this is to have someone help keep you accountable to it. You set timers for studying, set reminders for studying, and the sooner you sit down and study, the less you'll be playing catch up later. Sometimes this is hard if you're working or have a family on top of studying for school, especially nursing school or med school, but it is really important. I mean, you're sinking money into this, you're sinking time into it, and you need to make sure that others respect that just as much as you need to be respecting that. So make sure you have someone who can keep you accountable or text you once a day and be like, hey, are you studying? Or sit down and study with you or quiz you. But then make sure you're also setting timers, because sometimes I would just get so overwhelmed by the amount of information that I needed to study that a lot of times I would go to the professor and say, what's the most important to study? What is the biggest percentage of material on this exam? And they would tell me like, oh, it's cardiac, or oh, it's from chapters 2 through 3. And then I would break that down into categories, you know, or pages or whatever, and then start setting 30-minute timers, because my attention span is probably only about 30 minutes, and I would study it for 30 minutes, take a 10-minute break, like repeat it back / quiz myself for 30 minutes, and then I would move on to the next one, 30, 10, 30, 10, and that made it easier to take it in bite-sized chunks. Something that you struggle with is procrastination. That's one of the ways that you can remedy that is by just studying early so that you're not playing catch up later and not getting freaked out later or sitting down the test and be like, why did it take so long to study this, or pull an all-nighter. Another one that I struggled with a little bit, but not as much as the other reasons why I was anxious, which I'll get into in a moment, is how you look in front of others. One way to remedy this is by not comparing yourself to others. Now, the one good thing about having school online and like online resources these days is that a lot of times after an exam is posted, you'll see like the mean, you'll see kind of like this little like scale, and you'll see what the mean average score was, like the average score on the test was, what the lowest was, and what the highest was. So you can compare yourself to others without physically in person comparing yourself to others. And that helps motivate you more, I feel like, a little bit, but it doesn't bring you down in front of people or vice versa. You don't want to compare yourself too much to other people because they have different strengths than you do and different weaknesses, whether it's in nursing or outside of that. Maybe it's not even something that's testable, like communication or bedside manners. You still have something to offer, so you cannot compare yourself to others in person. But if you want to compare, so you at least have some motivation or understand like where you're following in the knowledge base of, you know, how well you're doing, then you can at least look at those online resources and see what the average was, or at least ask the professor what the average score was. they'll pretty much always give it to you. But don't compare yourself to others. You don't have to share your test grades, even if everybody else is. And you might hear them, but just try to tune it out or walk away, or don't hang around after a test if you can help it, because people always talk about it. Even if you're not supposed to talk about it, or people will still talk about how they feel like they did and share their grades after, and you don't have to listen to it if you don't want to. Okay, the last two reasons, which kind of go hand in hand, why you might be having test anxiety, which is what I struggled with personally, is the high stakes for the exam and kind of the feelings of inadequacy that went along with doing poorly. So obviously, if you're in nursing school, especially if you don't have a plan B, because I didn't really have a plan B other than maybe be a coffee barista until I could figure out a real plan B, that made everything that I did much more high stakes because I didn't have another plan. And every test felt like, man, if I fail this one, I'm going to be playing catch up for the rest of my life, it felt like. When even though that wasn't the case, I would still be playing catch up. It's high stakes. You know, it's prepping you for the NCLEX. You'll be in a real world situation where people's lives are at stake. And then every test, you know, if you do poorly on it, you have to reach a certain average. And for nursing students, it was somewhere between a high C and like a low B. You couldn't do any worse than that. Makes it high stakes, and what I get into in a few minutes will help with those feelings. But then also the feeling of inadequacy. If you do poorly and it is high stakes, then you're like, man, how am I going to do later on? I don't, you know, seem to know as much compared to my peers and things like that. So now here's the part on some techniques that I implemented and you guys might be able to try for test anxiety, and just some tips overall. So one of the first things that you can do, obviously, is seek out counseling. A lot of times there's free counseling with schooling programs or even work programs if you're working on top of school, and talk to them about kind of where the anxiety is coming from, and just make sure that you're identifying the things that are actually causing the anxiety and see what they have to say, because they can usually tailor things more to you. Now, the other thing that you can do, which is really easy, and I used to always, roll my eyes anytime somebody said this to me, was actually breathing techniques. There's something very calming about it. It helps lower your heart rate and helps you be a little bit more focused, and helps lower those cortisol levels just a little bit, so you're not just feeling like you're choking on like information and feeling like, you know, super tight and anxious. So there are a lot of like breathing technique videos on YouTube. I love pointing people to other resources because obviously I'm not the professional on breathing techniques, but look at those. I'm sure people have them tailored to test anxiety, but even just sitting in your chair and breathing until the test starts, and breathing in for 4 seconds, holding it for 3 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, and just focusing on that will help ground you for sure. Some other things that you can do to help you stay focused and be less distracted that I know some of my friends would do is putting earplugs in. I personally have tinnitus, which is that ringing in your ears when things get too silent. So it didn't work for me, it worsened things, but you can always bring headphones that cover your ears or earplugs, and that can help tune out what's going on. Another thing that helped me personally with my test anxiety was to have a blank piece of paper. So if your professor's kind enough to provide paper, I would go ahead and take them up on that, or ask them if they can provide it, where it's just scratch paper. A lot of times they won't let you bring your own scratch paper just in case you messed around with it or something. But a lot of times professors are very open to bringing scratch paper for you and your classmates. And there's something about that that was really nice for exams, especially for nursing exams, where you could draw diagrams and kind of think through things, or at the start of the test, if there was like a chart that I had to remember, like lab values, I would, as fast as I could, just write down all the lab values I could remember and then start taking the test. That way it kind of almost felt like I had my own cheat sheet, even though it came from my own brain, but having it out there for some reason was nice, so then I didn't have to recall it when it came up. I could just look at that and be like, okay. So that might be something that's helpful. Obviously, if you do dosage calculations, you'll probably need some scratch paper. At least I liked having it, even though I had a calculator, because I'm a very visual person when it comes to math. So just see if you can bring or obtain scratch paper from your professor. And one last tip that I have for you guys that they've done studies on before is you can actually chew gum while you study, and then chew the same gum while you take an exam. There's something about that repetition that makes it a little bit easier for you. But then also they've done studies that show that when you have that same flavor in your mouth, it helps recall whatever you studied when you were chewing that gum. Obviously, it's not like gonna be magic, you know, you have to actually study the material, but there's something comforting about that. And because I'm a very like twitchy person, I can't sit still for long. Chewing gum helped me stay a little bit more focused. Something nice about when you sit down and you have repetition or something is familiar. So chewing the piece of gum, having that piece of paper in front of you, are all just like familiar things. And the very last thing I would suggest is if you have test anxiety with time management, like you're afraid you're going to go much longer than you need to, you can always time yourself as you take practice questions and just work on getting better. Practice makes perfect, of course. So you can like set aside like so many practice questions that match the same number of questions that would be on an exam, and then just see how long it takes you. Plus, you're getting into that repetition. You're making that more familiar territory for you so that when you sit down and take the exam, you feel like you've kind of done it before. So I hope that all of this was helpful when it comes to test anxiety and taking exams, especially in nursing school. I still haven't gotten completely over it, but the main thing to remember is that it's learning about how to manage it and keep it from being debilitating as opposed to overcoming it completely. I mean, I even know people who have stage fright, just as a good example, who they've never overcome their stage fright. They've just learned how to manage it. They know how to do breathing techniques beforehand, rehearse things with their friends, and then after a while you do it so many times that it no longer feels like super anxiety inducing. You know how the start of the test I feel like is more anxious than when you're in the middle or near the end of it. I'm sure the same would go for someone who's on stage, where it's all the before that you work yourself up and then you jump into it. So maybe another thing you could even try is just making sure you're distracted up until the test. Because when I was studying, when I was waiting in a room an hour before the test just to make sure I was there on time, I really worked myself up. It was like working yourself up before jumping off a cliff. Sometimes you just need to jump off it. Sometimes you just need to walk all the way up and then just jump off, as opposed to walk up, stay there for an hour, and then jump off the cliff, if that makes sense. So find things to distract yourself, to keep yourself calm, like the breathing, music, maybe even find like an inspirational song that you listen to every time before you test take, and just mellow in that. Talk to a friend, call a parent, you know, if they're supportive, and then do that up until like it's just about time to take the test. And that keeps you a little distracted and not just like ruminating on all the anxiety. I hope that all of this was helpful. And if you struggle with test anxiety, drop a comment down below. I'd love to make this a safe space to talk about it. And if you have tips and things to share with others, again, feel free to drop that below. All right, I love you guys, and thank you for supporting me and joining me here. Tutu Anana, I'll see you later.